I welcome you to my collab. We have many amazing narrators here. So I'd like you to sit back, relax, and enjoy.
You sit in a room, walls and floor covered in cushions. You lie in a corner, a jacket embracing you. It created a feeling of security. You wonder why you're there, why your family would betray you in such a way. Then you remember. Your family is dead. You close your eyes and drift off to sleep. You sit in class, your cheek resting on your hand as you listen to the ramblings of the teacher. You notice some students' heads whip back up to look at the clock. Who would blame them? It's the last class of the day. You find yourself doing it too. 5 minutes. You look down at the worksheet handed at you and start doodling. Before you know it, the bell rings, and the students swarm out of the room at lightning speeds. Again, can't blame them. It's Friday after all. You collect your things and walk out of the room. As you're walking outside, you notice a crow in the tree. You stop to examine it. Something was off about it, but you can't quite put your finger on it. It was pitch black. Its feathers shined in the sun. You quickly shake your head and look back, only to see that it's not there anymore. You blink and wonder if it's just your imagination. You shrug it off and get the bus to go home. Arriving home, you grab a snack. "Mom, I'm home," you yell out and go up to your room. She yells a loud hello from the laundry room as you close the door to your room. You lay on your bed and spread out your homework for the weekend. Might as well get it done now. You get started when the lights go out in your house. You light a candle and set it on your desk. Your mother comes and checks up on you. You nod to show that you're okay, and she smiles to go check on your brother. Your father came home to inform you that the generator a couple of blocks away was blown. You sigh. It'll be off for a while. You try to finish your homework, but you get distracted. You look at the shadows the candle creates. They dance across the walls, which brings a smile to your face. You close your eyes and end up falling asleep. You wake up to a bright light. You open your eyes and sit up groggily. The lights are back on, and you look at your analog clock. It's midnight. You change into your pajamas and brush your teeth. You put away your homework and climb into bed. Pulling the covers over your head, you try to get back to sleep. Not even 5 minutes have passed, and you hear tapping on your window. You sit up in the darkness of your room and listen, thinking it was your imagination. You lay back down, only to hear it again. You look around until you catch a small figure at your window. Puzzled, you stagger out of bed and open the window. To your surprise, the crow from before flew into your bedroom and perched upon the chair in front of your desk. You rub your eyes once more to make sure you aren't just seeing things, but to no avail. The bird is still there on your desk chair. Not wanting the thing in your room, you roll up a piece of newspaper and try to scare it away. After 5 minutes with no success, you give up and sit on the floor. Sighing, you look up at the animal on your chair, and to your shock, it speaks. You tumble backwards and scoot until your back hits the wall.
"No need to fear me, mortal. I am simply here to help."
You blink and stand up, saying back, "What are you?" The crow cocks its head and turns towards you.
"My name? Well, quite simply put, I am insanity."
You blink and look at it in confusion. Insanity? That can't be possible. The bird blinks once. Its eyes seem to be glowing.
It is true. I am insanity itself. As far as helping you, look into my eyes.
Its eyes were glowing, and they seemed to glow more and move in waves. You shake your head and try to look away, but the eyes of the bird beckon you to look. You look cautiously with one eye, only to discover it hovering before you, making you look directly into its eyes. You can't fight the urge anymore and give in. Not even 1 minute of staring when suddenly everything goes black. You awake in your bed. The light shining through your closed window wakes you as you rub your eyes. Remembering the events of last night, you wonder if it was all a dream. It all seemed so real though. You get up to notice a red mark on your forehead. I probably just fell asleep on something that left that mark, you say to yourself, trying to create a logical explanation for yourself to feed off of, that the happenings of last night were nothing. You go on with your day. The mark on your forehead never went away. In fact, it started burning. By the time you get home, the burn was unbearable. You hold your forehead and walk into the kitchen. Mom, my forehead's burning. Mom? She was staring blankly at the fridge. Mom, what are you doing? She doesn't move, so you decide to slowly move towards her. You lay a hand on her shoulder and spin her around. Your face switches from caution to that of worry. You shake her gently. Mom? Mom? You notice something on her forehead. The same exact mark as yours. You let go of her and she just falls to the floor. Stepping back, she raises up like a marionette, holding a butter knife. Mom, what are you gonna do with that? Your mother doesn't speak. She merely gets the knife into a stabbing position. A horrendous croaking comes from her mouth as her head twitches side to side. It would be enough for a sane man to go mad. You yelp and turn to run out of the kitchen. Suddenly, a sharp pain in your side. You run into the living room and look down. It's grazed, but enough to be bleeding. You look to see your mother at the kitchen entrance, blood dripping from the knife. From upstairs you hear footsteps. Down comes your brother and your father. Same marks on their foreheads too. What the fuck? They fly at you. You run. The front door is locked, and they've blocked your path to the back door. You're cornered. The last thing you see is them coming towards you, when suddenly, darkness. Next thing you notice, you're in that room. You open your eyes, back to the reality that is yours. When they found you, you were sitting in your living room, your family's corpses surrounding you. Your mother had a butter knife through the forehead. Flashback, your mother is crying in the corner of the living room. No, please don't do this. What is wrong with you? Where'd my baby go? She was cut off. It would take inhuman strength to penetrate the forehead bone, police said. Your father had his testicles cut off. Multiple deep cuts on his chest and bruises everywhere with the concussion. Flashback, you're walking up the stairs, opening the door to your father's office. What are you doing here? Wait, hey, what are you planning to do with that saw? Get away from me! Grabbing his body, throwing it down the stairs next to your mother. Your brother, his arms and legs were bent in unimaginable angles. Flashback, you're walking to your brother's room next. His television is on. His game is paused. You find him cowering in the corner. He's crying. How disgusting. You grab him and drag him out. No, please, don't do this, he says through his tears. What's wrong with you? Who are you? What's wrong with your eyes? You smirk and speak. Your voice is different.
My name? My name is irrelevant, but I'll tell you as a last wish. I am insanity.
You throw him down the stairs too. He screams in pain as he hits the ground. You walk to him, breaking his arms and legs. He looks like a pretzel. Tears streaming down his cheeks as you snap the neck to finish him off. You were found in the middle, laughing and mumbling about some crow. When mentioning it, you saw the crow in the window, on the ceiling fan, hovering behind your family with those glowing eyes. In this room filled with white, you look up to the ceiling to find a black shadow. It moves in a streak, creating the form of the crow you know so well. Seeing it, you start laughing. When you abruptly stop, you grin and say to yourself,
I know insanity.
Personally.
I Found Love with the Wrong Woman by I Stan Catwoman, narrated by 242. I first met the woman I thought was the love of my life through a mutual friend. I had dragged myself to my friend's party after being depressed and hating my life for weeks. My heart had been broken for the upteenth time when a girl I liked rejected me. I really thought I was in love with her and would have treated her like a princess, but clearly she didn't see that. Well, to hell with her, I thought. I decided not to feel sorry for myself and to have some fun with my friends. I was sitting around drinking, talking about video games and stuff, when she walked in. The most stunning woman I have ever seen. She had black hair, the most mesmerizing green eyes, full lips, and legs that didn't seem to end. She wore a pencil dress that hugged her hips and accentuated her curves perfectly. I asked the host, my friend, who she was, and he told me she was his girlfriend's friend. I asked him to introduce us. He smirked at me and asked, "Really?" He was obviously implying I didn't stand a chance with her, but he laughed and said, "Okay, fine," when he saw me frown. Her name was Svetlana. Her voice sounded like the music of the gods. I could listen to it forever. She and I talked casually for a while. By now, I had overcome my nervousness and decided to ask her out. I suggested we go out to dinner. She gave me a sexy, mysterious smile and tilted her head to the right. She seemed amused. I wasn't able to decipher her facial expressions. But then she said, "Yeah, let's do that." I was jubilated, though I tried not to let her know that. The following Saturday evening, Svetlana and I went to a nice restaurant. We ate, we chatted, and it all went well. I found out that she works in investing banking. I wasn't really comfortable with this, as it meant that she probably made more money than me, but I quickly dismissed that worry. I told myself that when we get married and have kids, she's going to be a stay-at-home mom to our 4 beautiful children, and I, of course, would have been the breadwinner and the man of the house. Another thing that bothered me was that she was also very opinionated. It wasn't a deal breaker for me, but was certainly something I'd have to take care of. She was also really tall, like a supermodel. I don't like how she seemed a few inches taller than me in her heels. But then I thought about those long legs which would be wrapped around me when we would have sex. When we were done eating, she suggested we go for a walk near the lake. As we walked, I placed my hand on her waist. I mean, now she was my girlfriend. I could touch her any way I wanted, right? She again gave me that smile. The smile that made me hard and sent chills down my spine at the same time. She told me to kiss her. I hadn't felt a woman's lips on mine in so long. Hell, I hadn't been this close to a woman in over a year. Our lips met, and I could feel her voluptuous breasts pressing against me, and her thighs were pressing against my hardening member. My heart raced. I couldn't believe this was happening. After being deprived of female companion for so long, I was making out with this gorgeous work of art. I felt intoxicated by the taste of her lips, but then she pulled away. She told me it was late and that she needed to go home. I was a little annoyed by this. I was sure that it was about to seal the deal, but I told myself that since she was a woman, she probably needs emotional security in order to be aroused, and she clearly liked me. We went on a few more dates and had a few more makeout sessions. On the surface, things seemed fine, but something that constantly bothered me was that Savannah was not submissive to me. I was the male in the relationship. I should be the one calling the shots. I had spoken to some men who had way more experience with women than I did, and they all told me to apply the nagging technique, to bring a woman down a few pegs so she accepts subservient role. They told me to criticize her, to point out her flaws. I really thought it would do the trick and would break that impetuous confidence Savannah had. Don't get me wrong, I loved her. But a relationship with a woman who refuses to accept her man as a leader was never going to work. I just needed to work out these little flaws in Savannah and she would be the perfect wife. However, none of the nagging techniques worked. Anytime I criticized her or ordered her not to do something, she would laugh as if it was the funniest thing she ever heard. She would just dismiss what I had said and did exactly what she wanted. Anytime I told her opinion was wrong, she gave me that same smile. I was now beginning to understand what that smile meant. It was a smile of condescension. She wasn't taking me serious at all. She treated my attempts at asserting my dominance like a child throwing a tantrum. The worst thing about this was that she hadn't slept with me. Even after nearly a month of dating, we'd kissed. She guided my hands to her beautiful breast, teased my throbbing member, but that was it. She either leave or would ask me to leave her house, telling me she had a meeting the next day, or some bull. It infuriated me that her career was more important to her than me. I loved her. I could be the best thing that ever happened to her. Why couldn't she see that? Then one day, I heard something that turned my world upside down. I was at my friend's place, the same guy who had introduced me to Savannah. His girlfriend was talking to some of the other girls about how Savannah had been too busy with her job and new boyfriend and couldn't spend much time with her. I was just starting to smirk, but as I listened, I realized that she wasn't talking about me at all. She was talking about my Savannah, but some other guy. I asked my friend if he knew she had been cheating on me. He just looked confused. He told me he didn't think I'd get more than one date from a woman like Savannah, and that she probably just agreed to have dinner with me once out of pity. I was furious that my friend thought so little of me. I stormed out, got into my car, and drove over to Savannah's house. I was going to confront that little cheating whore. I banged on her front door with all my strength. It was opened at last, but not by Savannah. It was a guy. He was tall, good-looking, and shirtless. He asked me what the hell I wanted. He had an accent, European probably, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I began yelling for Savannah. She was right behind him and told me to be quiet in the same condescending tone that made me feel so small. She was in a negligee and showing more of her skin than she had ever exposed with me. No one needed to draw me a picture. I began to yell at her, calling her a cheating, lying slut, when the guy she was with grabbed me by the back of my neck and told me to shut up. Savannah smiled and stepped forward to stand next to the guy. She caressed his muscular bicep with her long, delicate fingers and told me my accusations were unfair. "I never told you we were exclusive," she said. "You just assumed we were, and I can't be responsible for your assumptions. And I don't know why you're so upset. I mean, you didn't really think you had a chance with a woman like me, did you?" They both laughed. They laughed. I left her house, but this wasn't over. That bitch was going to pay for what she did to me. She just toyed with me and tossed me aside. She thinks she can just crush my manhood and walk away? Well, I would show her, and I began to plan my revenge. After much thought, I decided I was going to kill her. I had been to her house several times and knew the layout. I waited till the wee hours to break in through the basement window. She had once mentioned that it needed fixing and that its hinges were loose. Luckily, she hadn't gotten around to getting it fixed. I was able to use my crowbar to pry it open and entered her home. It was also quite fortunate, or so I thought at the time, that she lived in a somewhat secluded area. The house around her were all empty. I decided to wait in the basement till she came home. Maybe the slut would bring a guy home with her, in which case I'd have to wait for another day when she would be alone. I waited, holding the sharp knife I had brought with me. I was just ruminating about what an awesome revenge this would be when I heard her front door open. I couldn't hear any voices and I realized she was alone. This was perfect. I decided to wait for her to go to bed. I leaned back against the wall when I felt something. One of the wooden panels in the wall was loose. It had been deliberately taken out and the space behind it was hollow. I decided to look into it. In the hollow space was a box. I opened the box and it contained some photographs. I began to look through the pictures and what I saw made my blood run cold. They were of Savannah posing with different men in different pictures, and each of those men was dead. Most of them hang upside down by pulley systems with their throats cut. And in each picture, Savannah posed with a machete or a chainsaw. It was like her own fucked up scrapbook, a collection of her trophies. I counted them, and there was at least 15 men, dead men that she had posed with. Had she killed them all herself? What the hell had I gotten myself into? I was so preoccupied with these thoughts, I didn't realize the basement door had opened. I turned around to find Savannah standing right there with a large machete in her hand. and she wore that same smile that was somehow both beautiful and terrible. With shaking hands, I raised my own knife to defend myself, but Savannah knocked it out of my hands with ease. I was now defenseless and decided to run. I ran out of the same window through which I had broken in. Savannah, for whatever reason, didn't chase me. I went to the cops and confessed my crime of breaking and entering. I also told them what I found in the basement. They searched her house and found nothing. Of course, Savannah had gotten rid of the photographs. I was charged with breaking and entering and had to pay a huge fine and perform community service. I tried to tell my friends what I had seen, but they didn't believe me either. To them, I was just some creep who broke into someone's house. Savannah could have got a restraining order against me, but she hasn't. This scares me even more. Why isn't she taking legal action when she can do so very easily? Is she saving me for something truly sick and twisted? I decided to leave town, especially after what I saw on the news this morning. A student from Hungary has gone missing in our city. They showed a picture of him on screen. It was the same guy who I had seen at Savannah's place that night I confronted her. I wish I had never met that beautiful monster.
The ever-present dim glow of the red blinking illumination subtly lit up the room, barely past that of pitch dark, in painfully rhythmic intervals. The alarm had just jostled loose earlier that morning when I went to retrieve my charger from the power strip. Since it was Saturday, I didn't bother with the hassle of resetting the alarm for Monday, or even the time for that matter. Although the blinking display claimed it was 4:47 p.m., it was in reality well after midnight. It was Valentine's Day, well, the day after, when considering the transition that occurs at midnight. And the evening before had been a bust. Sure, at least Mia had found the peace of mind enough to allow her to slip into blissful rest, and that left me frustrated, bothered, and unable to find slumber. I had this big dinner planned, in combination with a night out on the town. I had made reservations and everything. We took a walk in the park earlier in the day and watched a movie later in the evening once we returned home. I bought the largest heart-shaped box of assortment chocolates I could find, and a dozen roses, an arrangement complete with baby's breath that cost a total of $75. Also, you wouldn't believe the size of the stuffed bear that I had to wrestle into the back seat of my tiny black four-door. That I couldn't hide, and had to give to her first thing in the morning. Still, Mia's mood seemed to lower immensely as the day progressed into night. From her perspective, some of the day's events, such as our outing to the park, surfaced some painful, tragic memories that always seemed to lay in wait until opportune times. I wish I could make her understand the certain nostalgia that I have for these things, the emotions that they stir in me. But, oh well, such is the case sometimes with love. The instances of remittent, almost iconic secrecy associated with marriages. I could never tell her. She could never understand, just like she feels I cannot understand. I gave the subtle motion of a shrug, decided to take my lumps, that I more than deserved, and wrestled my mind into submission for the night's rest. Tomorrow would be the hell it always is the day after, as per the usual. The chill of an early morning kissed the outside of the bedroom's window glass, creating a crystallized border that lined its rectangular circumference. I opened my eyes and peered across the room through the center of the partially obstructed portal, only to have my eyes greeted with the gray clouds of a morning sky. I laid my right arm across the bed to my side and discovered the touch of cold blankets and an empty mattress. She must already be up, I mumbled to myself. With a groan, I sat up into position, scratched my face, and readied myself to prepare for the day ahead. There's only so much preparation that one can do when you don't expect to find your wife sobbing in the corner of the shower, collapsed onto her knees and weeping into her hands. As I ventured my way into the bathroom for my morning relief, that's exactly what I found. I had heard the weeping as I approached the bathroom, so I had an idea of what I was in for. What caught me off guard was the prescribed remedy that I was about to endure. By the time I had gotten her naked body off the bathroom floor and into a dry towel, I was soaking wet, giving me need for my own towel as well. "Honey, what's wrong?" I asked her. But I already know. She gave me a look that was somewhere between confusion and disgust, reflecting the preposterous context of my rhetorical question in her glistening, teary eyes. I left her sitting on the toilet as I fumbled through the prescription bottles in the medicine cabinet. For times such as these, the doctor had prescribed her Thorazine. 1 pill to calm her down, 2 to put her to sleep. I decided to give her 1 and see how she felt in an hour. Unfortunately for me, I suffered an extra 15 minutes of bladder pains and pee dances before I managed to find the time to relieve my morning self. Of course, she didn't have to ask me first, and she was even told to just call if she felt that she needed to. But while I was upstairs getting dressed is when she took him up on his offer. It wasn't too big a deal, but imagine my surprise when I came downstairs to discover that she had made plans for a day trip between the time that I sat her down in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and the time that I fastened my belt around my waist, finishing my daily dressing ritual. My wife, Mia, has had, well, let's just say issues since around her college years. She suffered a trauma that's had a detrimental impact on her life ever since. In order to receive the medication that she takes, she's required to visit a licensed therapist once every month. This particular therapist had told her to call if she ever felt the need to do so. Well, on this specific morning, she felt the need to do just that. I knew the day was going to be a rough one, full of consolation and repetitive motions of coinciding annual sympathy. But as I walked into the kitchen, the coffee aromas rising to my nostrils as I filled my mug, Mia presented me with yet another surprise. During her last visit to his office, the doctor had proposed that she return to the scene of the event that they both recognized as the root of her problem. But at the time, as she informed me, she felt reluctant to pursue her therapist's suggestion, and decided that it would be a bad idea. Now, however, during the course of the morning and my presence absent from the kitchen and nearby landline, the man was finally able to talk her into it. As if the relentless whining and sobbing wasn't enough, now I would have to spend the majority of my day traveling 3 hours each way back and forth from Mia's former alma mater. With a sigh that bordered between the intentions of concealment and purposeful presentation, I walked over to her, groomed my fingers through her hair, and gave her a loving kiss. I sat down in the chair next to her, sitting sideways with my right arm to the back. There's no point in getting comfortable. We'd have our shoes on and be out the door in only a few minutes after we finished our cups of rich, dark-roasted Java. The repetitious thump of tires across intervals of contraction lines in the highway's pavement droned out as we made our way across the blustery countryside and towards our destination. I did my best to make small talk with Mia, but she didn't say much, remaining mostly quiet and reserved. I could tell that she was feeling apprehensive of emotions this excursion would stir, but I honestly was feeling a little anxious to arrive. My memories of the place were those of fond ones. It's where I met Mia for the first time, after all. The campus itself is nothing short of monolithic, an archaic museum of buildings constructed for various educational specializations, all placed within a setting that could be described as a sprawling park. Paved walkways crisscrossed the grounds, which were bordered by tree lines on 3 sides and a river on the 4th. The center of the campus was thick with forest life, and tall trees and buildings within reminded me a little bit of Harry Potter's Hogwarts. Of course, in correlation with the season, everything was gray and sparse, trees devoid of leaves, revealing the evergreens through their spiderwebs of skeletal branches. Neither Mia nor I said a word to one another from this point on until we parked the car. I'd heard the story many times beforehand, lived it beforehand, and knew exactly where to park without her having to tell me, or I having to ask. Over at the far east end, adjacent to the river's edge, was a tree line into which some of the paved walkways extended. This was our destination, and Mia's location of psychological torment. I unbelted myself from my seat and opened the door. Climbing to my feet, I leaned back in. Mia was just sitting with a vacant stare, glaring through the windshield. "You coming?" I asked her. She said nothing. "Come on, honey. Everything's gonna be fine," I reassured her. With a sigh, Mia unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the door. After stepping out, we shut the doors in unison. Hand in hand, the two of us started down a path most significant to Mia and her memories. A landscape can change so much as seasons progress. Time takes hold, and monuments fade. But in actuality, those woods were as pristine and silent as they were on that fateful day. With each subsequent step, the two of us walked a tragedy lane, memories flooding back with each forward movement. The deeper into the woods we progressed, the deeper her mind slipped forth the buoyant recollections of crestfallen past. We both recalled the account of Mia's attack. During the weeks leading up to Valentine's Day, many years ago, Mia received frequent letters from a secret admirer. A few times, she'd caught notice of his shadow watching her in the distance, but she never did get a good look at him, or affirm his identity as her admirer, or stalker, as it were. On Valentine's Day, she'd gone for a walk to escape her current boyfriend, who was being somewhat of an ass at the time. It was cold, dark, and she was alone on these trails. Well, alone except for the one who pursued her, watching her from the shadows, just out of eyeshot. With no one around to hear her scream, this mystery man attacked Mia, throwing her to the ground, and forced himself upon her. It was the one and only time she'd ever actually gotten a good look at that face. As we walked, her eyes welling up in tears, I couldn't help but find myself in wonder. A name change is cheap, and plastic surgery affordable to more people than one would think. I don't understand how she could have such prolonged, painful memories regarding a man that she unknowingly married.
It didn't start out bad. I used to not mind living at the edge of a thick forest. Then it started. It wasn't too bad at first. It all started out as waking up in the middle of the night and hearing a few twigs snap out of place or leaves rustling before falling back asleep. I lived with my parents in a rural neighborhood where the closest neighbors were a mile away. My bed is across my room, pressed up against the wall. When my head was turned to the side, I could see out my window. I could see the forest line in my backyard from the window. I woke up one morning to a handprint on my window. Seeing this meant that someone was in my backyard, looking into my room. Then I realized something else very disturbing about the handprint. The fingers of the handprint were too long and thin. I got up and went to my parents' room. They didn't listen to me. They never listened to me. One night passed. Nothing happened, but I still felt uneasy. I didn't wake up that night, but I'm sure something had happened because the bird feeder my parents had hung up was on the ground. I told my parents this, but they dismissed it as the squirrels doing it. The next night, I woke up to a strange, eerie feeling. My eyes looked up at the window and I almost screamed. A tall, lanky figure was roaming around the forest line. It was completely shrouded in darkness and hunched over. Its fingers, legs, and neck were far too long. Its movements were so unnatural and slow. Suddenly, it completely straightened up and snapped its head to look at me. I buried my head in my pillow. Then I must have passed out from fear. For the next few nights, it would get closer to my window. It wandered around aimlessly, occasionally glancing at me with a sinister look. Tonight, I looked up to the window. It's right there. Black leathery skin looks like it's being pulled against its body. I can see its ribs and spine segments through its skin. I gasped and pulled my blanket over my head. My breathing quickens, then I hear it. Right against my window. Then I make a mistake. I look up to the window. It's standing there, staring at me. Its white eyes reflecting in the dark, showing its tiny pupils. This time it's louder and more aggressive. Its long, bony fingers placed lightly against the glass. It opens its mouth. Oh, God. It has at least 100 long, thin, razor-sharp teeth. It lets out an ear-piercing screech. Its neck twitched then. I'm in shock. It slams its head against my window. Then it happens again. Its neck contorted again before slamming its head against my window, still screeching. I start to panic. It gets faster. The glass of the window is cracking. I start crying. I'm not sure how I didn't start crying sooner. The glass shatters. I scream. I woke up in a hospital bed. There's a searing pain in my arm. I look at it. My left arm is wrapped tight, bloody bandages. My right arm is an IV drip. I'm in a hospital again. Parents then walk into the room. I see my mom is crying. My mom rushes over and hugs me. She's just repeating, "I'm sorry," over and over, crying into my shoulder. I hug her back before my dad goes on. My parents explained that they heard me scream and found me passed out, bleeding out from my arm and the side of my stomach, and the window broken. They called the police. The police just called it a home break-in. Left it at that. But I know what I said. That was 6 years ago, and I still can't stand the sight of the forest at night. I need courage to fall asleep. I live in a city apartment building on the 3rd floor now. My parents don't believe me when I tell them what happened, even though I'm still in therapy for it to this day. They said it was probably just sleep paralysis. But I've never had sleep paralysis before or since, and I can move my body just fine the entire time.
I am always with you. I was there for the tower corner. I stood in the delivery room, staring down at you before you could even open your eyes to see me. Your family and doctors couldn't see me there in the corner, watching you with cloudy eyes. But I was there from the time you were born, and I followed you home. I was with you always, your constant companion. You played with your toys alone, while I stared from all angles at your mirrors. My matted, clotted hair with oily sweat that hung off my dented forehead like glue. I accompanied you all the time, drifting behind your mother's car on your ride to preschool. You thought you were alone in the bathroom, but I was on the other side of the door, wind whistling through the bruised hole in my throat, my arms twisted and hanging in their sockets as I stood hunched over on the other side of the shower curtain. I lay and followed and drifted behind you. I'm not seeing you. You're almost non-existent tonight. You never saw me that morning as I sat across from you at the breakfast table. A shiny red clot hanging from an empty tube socket as I gaped grotesquely at you. I wonder sometimes if you know I'm here. I think you are aware, but you'll never understand just how close I am. I spend hours of your day doing nothing more than breathing, gagging really, in your ear. I crave to be close to you, to always wrap my crippled arms around your neck. I lie near you every single night, cloudy eyes staring at your ceiling, underneath your bed, at your sleeping face in the dark. Yes, you caught me staring occasionally. Your parents came running down to your room one night when you screamed. You were just beginning to talk, so you were only able to cry out, "Man, man in my room." You thought you'd never forget the sight of me, with my collapsed jaw hanging to my chest, swinging back and forth. I sank back into your closet, and your mother was unable to see me though you pointed, and pointed. You thought you'd never forget when they left that same night. You saw the closet door crack so softly, and me crawling across the floor to your bed on all fours, shambling and jerking movements as I pushed myself under your bed on disjointed limbs. You learned a new word for me. Boogeyman. Not quite the monster you thought I was. I'm just waiting and following you always, stroking your face with my knotted fingers as you sleep. You'll see me again soon. Any day now I'm coming, blunt and brutal. One day, you'll walk across the road, and I believe I'll plow into you with a loud roar and a screech. You'll roll on the pavement, roll under wheels, blunt force metal fenders, and my fingers touching your face again and again. You'll stare up from the cold pavement with cloudy eyes. Your matted, clotted hair hangs in your face, and your jaw is unhinged and swaying against your chest. You'll notice me approaching. No one else will see me. You will stare past them into my eyes, and I'll leer down at you. For the first time in our life, something like a smile will come over our face. You'll swear you're looking into a mirror as clotted bits of scarlet bubble from our mouths. I'll lean down past the doctors and the ogling people and pick you up in my crooked arms. Our faces will touch. My wings will unfurl, and then you'll have to follow me, and I am always with you, for I am your guardian angel.
It was July 19th, 1978, when a lonely, middle-aged woman named Meredith moved into 728 West Grove Avenue. Meredith had just lost her husband to cancer, a kind man to whom she had been married to for 27 years. Meredith had no children. Her only remaining family was a sister who lived in St. Petersburg, Florida, more than 1,000 miles away from the lonely old house in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So, Meredith was all alone, a broken woman in her new, very old house. The only company she had on the first day of her new life was her young neighbor, Mrs. Anders, and her 2 children, a 5-year-old boy named Carter and his 8-year-old sister, Jenna. They had decided to welcome her to the neighborhood with some fresh baked cookies. Meredith didn't have the heart to tell Mrs. Anders that she had diabetes. It was only after Meredith began unpacking her collection of porcelain dolls that she began to notice some strange happenings within the shabby old house. Back aching, she noticed that a couple of her dolls had been turned around. She thought nothing of it. A wind or a careless arm could have done it. But then, one day, while Meredith was coming up from the dark, moldy basement, she heard the distinct sound of porcelain shattering against hardwood. Meredith ran upstairs to the little shelves where her dolls were so lovingly placed, only to find that the very first doll she'd ever bought, a beautiful Russian-style girl with long, dark hair, was in smithereens on the floor. Meredith was more sad than scared. She swept up the remains of the shattered little doll, and not being able to throw it away, put the scraps in a cardboard box and pushed it deep into the darkest, loneliest corner of her bedroom closet. Meredith had heard rumors of strange phenomenon in the house. The older man she'd bought the house from had told her to be careful, told her that the house could have some strange effects on the mind. Meredith had thought at the time that the man was old and confused. He must have been in his late 80s, after all. But now she began to think and ponder on what the man had said. especially the curious statement he had made last. There's something wrong with the basement. The basement was dingy and wet, yes, and perhaps there was some mold or fungus growing in the darkness. But this didn't bother Meredith. That's what basements are like, after all. As she exited the basement again, a knock sounded at the door. It was a fast, frantic knock. Meredith slowly walked towards the door, cautious. She was an older woman living alone, and a robbery wouldn't be unheard of. She opened the door. It was Mrs. Anders, her neighbor. She looked panicked, her eyes bloodshot and her hair a mess. "Oh, Meredith," she began, her voice shaking. "Please tell me you've seen Carter today." Meredith thought hard. Her mind wasn't what it used to be. Her memory had started to fade faster lately. "No, I can't say that I have," said Meredith, as she stood racking her brain. A look of disappointment and fear washed over Mrs. Anders. She looked up at Meredith and let out a small gasp. "Meredith, are you feeling all right?" she asked, concern in her voice. To tell the truth, Meredith hadn't been feeling all right. The last few days, she hadn't slept much. She was so tired, and her joints were screaming. She could feel her bones scraping together with every move she made. "I'm fine, dear," said Meredith. Mrs. Anders left and went to the next house. Meredith creaked her way out of the basement and up to look in the mirror in her bathroom. She looked dreadful. Her eyes were sunken, her hair was thin, and it was her skin that had gone ashen gray. She felt her forehead, expecting to find fever, but she was cold and clammy. "There's something wrong with the basement," she muttered to herself, echoing the old man. As she left the bathroom, she felt a sharp pain in her foot. She sat down on her bed and brought her foot up to her lap. A large shard of porcelain was protruding from her heel. She felt dizzy. Grasping the shard, she began to pull it out, wincing in pain. The shard drew cleanly from her heel, and a small trickle of blood followed. As she came up from the basement, the front door rattled in its frame from a loud, frantic pounding she had never heard before. She made her way to the door, her back brittle, her joints corroded and stiff. It was Mrs. Anders again. "Meredith!" she shouted. Her previous patience and kindness had completely evaporated. "I know you've done something with her, you witch." Her hair was stringy, her eyes sunken. She hadn't slept in days. "Where's Jenna? I know you know where she is." Meredith remained calm, almost absent, with these screams of anguish. "Please calm down, dear. Come in, and I'll make you some tea." "I don't want tea," shouted Mrs. Anders, tears running down her face. "I want to know what you've done with my children." Meredith looked puzzled. She leaned in close to Mrs. Anders. Her putrid breath smelled of metal. In a harsh whisper, she uttered, "There's something wrong with the basement." Mrs. Anders shoved past Meredith, knocking her to the floor. Mrs. Anders stormed through the decaying, decrepit house. Or what used to be a house. Dust and mold was abundant. It stunk like a rotting animal. Mrs. Anders approached the threshold of the basement. She opened the thin door, separating the house from the rotting underbelly that was the basement. She stood, staring down into the abyss, her legs shaking and her stomach turning. She already knew what she would find in the moldy basement. Just as Mrs. Anders' foot touched down on the first step, she felt a sharp push from behind. She stumbled down the stairs bashing her head on the banister several times. Her head hit the wet concrete floor before she came to rest at the bottom. She held her hand up in front of her eyes and recognized blood in the dim light. Blood that wasn't hers. At the top of the stairs, she recognized the silhouette of Margaret. Speaking with the voices of 20 at once, she solemnly said, "Mors tua, vita me," and shut the door. As Meredith walked up the stairs to her bedroom, her dolls, broken, battered, and dusty, littered the hallways. Her bedroom was close. She was so tired. She did what it had asked. She was sure she'd done what it had asked, but she couldn't seem to remember it. Not anymore. Maybe now it would grant her the peace of death. Maybe it would release her husband so they could be together. As Meredith lay in her bed, she felt a sharp pain in her chest. She smiled as her vision faded. "There's something wrong with the basement," she muttered as she slowly and calmly faded away, her heart beating more erratically until it finally stopped, and she was free.
I can't sleep. There's a spot in the hallway. It's at the far end, near my bedroom. One day I just noticed it and kept noticing it. Every morning I passed it, waking up. Every night I passed it, going to bed. Just a spot on the wall that's not quite there. Something I only seem to think is there. You hear about stories of people trapped in their subconscious. A subconscious that can't help but get a detail or two off, like fuzzy coma breadcrumbs leading back to reality. Items or spots you look at and feel your spine tingle, your eyes tighten, a dropping in your stomach. That's the spot, color the same as the rest of the wall, and hallway, and living room. When it started, the noticing I stare from the living room, sitting on my couch, turning off the TV just for a bit. I could only stand the spot for a few seconds. It gave me chills, like something was watching me, like I hid out of view, watching myself stare. That's the only way I could explain it. After a while, I forced myself to look at the spot. Mental exercise, yeah, or a lesson in fear. I could get up to half a minute before I feel I've made a mistake. I had some friends over, and the spot slipped into the conversation. I told my friends how eerie it was, how I got weird feelings, how I could see it from the dining room table over the guest's head. I figured they laughed, called me stupid or goofy. But they didn't. They only frowned, got quiet. One of my friends told me, "Don't do that." And the conversation died. None looked down the hall. That only got to me, and I spent a week staring at the spot all day when I could. And that awful watched feeling kept coming back. One night I was fed up and stormed down the hallway, my eyes not once looking away from the spot. I put my nose right up against the paint and just stood, waiting for anything else to happen. And I tell myself that this is all crazy, that the spot is not real, and that I've gotten hung up over nothing on a normal wall, that the watched feeling is my brain inputting something in my miserable life to turn those nerves on, pump the adrenaline, that this nonsense is just an act to scare myself because sometimes you just do that. But I can't. Because if the spot isn't real, then why did I feel compelled to stand there? Why was there a sound in the bedroom, like scuffling on the carpet? And what crawled past me when my back was turned?
I hate it when it's raining.
always driving, so it isn't the rain itself that gets under my skin, rather what the rain does to people. Days could go by as I sit waiting for one job to come through, but as soon as it starts raining, I get one request after the other. Sure, it's good for business, but something about the rain, the gloom of overhanging gray clouds, and the blanket of white noise just makes people snap. These people could be harboring darker thoughts for months at a time, but when the rain starts to fall, it's like they take it as a sign from the universe that their desires are justified. To get you up to speed, I work for a rideshare service. Or rather, I own a rideshare service that's a little off the books. There are a myriad of terrible people in this world, and I am among them, most certainly, but I saw an untapped market and figured I could make a quick buck off of it. Alright, look, say you're out with your friends, right? You all drove to the bar together, and you were supposed to be the designated driver, but your constant failed attempts to pick up a grade A dame eventually landed a bottle in your hand, and then another, and all of a sudden, uh-oh, you're so drunk that you can't tell if you're drooling or you just forgot to swallow the water. You should definitely be drinking. What do? Well, hopefully you, or more likely one of your friends, has the wits about them to call a service like Uber or Lyft to carry you and your barely functioning bodies home. With your head pounding, you can head back the next day and get your car. No one gets hurt. You might have danced a little too much with a cardboard cutout of Jack Daniels, but no harm, no foul. But consider this. You're out with your friends. You're the designated driver again, but a pretty lady from across the bar is giving you the eye. Oh, you lucky dog, you. You begin chatting, and she offers to buy you a drink. You decline, explaining you must assist your friends home. She laughs. Oh, what a gentleman you are. Then, to your sober surprise, she asks if you would like to go to her place where the drinks were free. I know you're getting excited, but remember this is just a fantasy. But let me continue. I promise I'm going somewhere with this. So, you drive your friends home. They're falling all over themselves in the backseat of your car, and Aaron just threw up. Yep, cool, awesome, great. But you don't care. You've got plans. Finally, you arrive at her place, and by God, it is a nice house. You can't believe your eyes as she welcomes you inside and pours you shot after shot. By now, your blood is nearly 100% vodka as she leads you into the kitchen. Her smile is intoxicating. You don't even notice the floor is making a crinkling noise, each step ruffling the plastic beneath you. So much plastic covering the floor and the countertops. You barely have time to think, not that you could in that state anyway. Your body is numb and your reactions are slow. Hell, it's almost a mercy at how much she gave you to drink. Because the knife in your stomach is hot, but it doesn't hurt. The heat retreats and returns over and over. You fall to the floor, your strength is non-existent. You lucky, stupid dog, you. All you can do is watch an ever-increasing pool of red swimming over the clear plastic. She stands over you as your body drains of color, and you become nothing but dead weight. That dark, terrible part of her is satisfied for the night, but, oh well, whatever will she do with your body? She needs to get that body out of her house and bury it far away. Well, she can't take her car, and what if she needs help with the body? You can't exactly call an Uber or Lyft. I mean, you can. Or, well, you could, but I'd highly advise against it. But anyway, you would call me. Those who need to know the name of the app already know it. Those who will need to know the name of the app will come across it when the time is right. Anyway, I hope my example was clear enough.
I'm essentially an Uber for serial killers. Well, serial killers, drug dealers, and pretty much any manner of dark people all alike. The price is pretty high, but a pretty penny is much more appealing than a dusty set of iron bars, right? Anyway, I've transported all manner of things, and sure, I have some pretty incredible stories to tell. The backseat of the car I use has seen everything from a duffel bag of blood money to a very intricate set of severed heads. Something about a D&D game that got a little too realistic. Anyway, if you've ever heard other stories about the bizarre phantoms of the night or hilariously mental people that always seem to just vanish into the night, well, I'm typically the one behind the headlights whisking them away. If you got the cash, I got you. Simple as that. I can't say I'm really ever afraid. People and things hire me because I present a means of convenience for them. If anything, I'm the safest person in the world for these broken creatures. It's the rain I can't stand. I don't get scared, but I do get annoyed. Because when it rains, people just snap. Lots of first-time killers panicking and just doing everything they can to make my job difficult. I guess that's what you get in the customer service industry. Huh. I could tell watching out the rain-streaked windows of my car it was going to be one of those kind of nights. Some twig of a figure pulling a large black trash bag behind him, just dragging it across the sidewalk. Like, for God's sakes, do you want me to just call the cops now and we can get this over with? But no, I pride myself on getting the job done, no matter what. Thank God the bag didn't tear open on the sidewalk. That would have been hard to cover up even in the rain. I pushed my finger down on the cold plastic button and heard the locks around me release. Of course, his hand was already pulling at the handle of the locks when they went up, and the damn fool was so nervous that he couldn't wait a second for the doors to unlock. So I pressed the locks again, and heard him pull once more at the handle just as they released and the door remained tightly shut. I peered into the rearview mirror and contemplated driving off. With a heavy sigh, I clicked the lock again, and a second later heard the door behind me open up, letting the sound of rain against wet cement in. Hey. The meager man stumbled out as he worked himself into the back seat. I used to open the trunk for my clients, but quickly discovered that people don't like letting their crimes out of sight. I rolled my eyes and exited the car. Running around the side, I lifted the bag in and pushed the soaked plastic inside. Only out of the rain for a moment, my clothes were already starting to stick to my skin as I slid back into the driver's seat. Thank you so much. He spoke again, his voice now a little more stable. People tend to feel safe if they have someone looking out for them. Even monsters, I suppose. Putting the car in drive, I pulled away from the curb. I could tell when I was lifting the bag into the back of the car that its contents were human. I nearly gave the individual a high five when I pushed into the car, like I was congratulating it on passing. We drove for a moment in silence. I find it's better if I take the client somewhere of my choosing. If I let them pick, just knowing where you hit the body can really weigh something fierce on you, but if I pick, they can earnestly say they have no idea where the body was. So busy night? The thin boy's voice trickled from the back seat. I couldn't believe this kid had a lifeless body next to him and was talking to me like I was some cashier. It's best if we don't talk, I mumbled out. Most of the time my jobs are silent. Only the deeply disturbed ever want to really talk with me, but they never want to hear me talk back, they just kind of want to hear themselves. Right, sorry, he responded, swallowing his words as he did. I didn't mean it. It just kind of happened, he continued. I lightly snapped my head back, banging on the headrest. Of course you didn't mean it. Of course, it isn't your fault. Woe is you, but who am I to judge? Looking in the mirror, I could see the young man staring at the garbage bag. She'll be awake soon, so anywhere is fine. The kid didn't even have the decency to finish the job. Well, it wouldn't be the first time, and sometimes the final blow is just part of the job. I drove until there weren't any cars in sight and pulled the car up on a side road, riding along the barren land until I could no longer see the strip of road behind us. Shovel's in the trunk. Be quick. I sputtered out, turning the engine off to kill the lights and noise. The kid nodded and exited the car, dragging the lump of a body behind him. There was an audible thud as the black bag smacked against the wet dirt. I watched as, under the moonlight, the client dug the shovel into the ground, his arms shaking with each impact. When he brought the shovel up, there was barely any dirt on it. Gripping the steering wheel tight, I shook my body back and forth, the car rocking ever so slightly with me. Pushing the door open, I once again was wrapped in the chill blanket of raindrops. Walking over to the kid, I pulled the shovel from his hand and began to dig for him. Sometimes you really gotta work with that tip. Shovel met dirt, stabbing in. Burying people was always such a pain when it was raining, but, well, you gotta do the work. Eventually the hole was deep enough and I gestured to the client. He put his foot on the bag and kicked it into the pit. I remembered him mentioning that the woman was still alive, so I pulled my handgun from my waist and aimed it into the grave. "Excuse me." The boy's voice rose over the pattering rain. "Just put the dirt back in, please," he demanded. His voice was noticeably solid and stern. Nothing like the shaky whimper he had offered me when he first got in my car. That's when the moonlight offered me a genuine glimpse into his eyes. Damn kid wasn't scared at all. He was playing a game. His body would snap in a stiff enough breeze, but there was a heavy monster behind those eyes. But hell, I don't ask questions. So I pushed the dirt back in and made the makeshift grave look like there wasn't anything disturbing there at all. Silently we returned to the car and took off, making sure to take a different route on the way back to where I picked him up from. He didn't even move an inch. I kept my eye on him the whole time, and not once did he shift position. What a genuine creep. Pulling up to his home, he finally snapped back to life. Opening the door, he stopped for a moment before turning his face to me. "See you soon." He smiled, and good God, what a complex little fellow this must have been. He exited the car and walked through the pouring rain until disappearing back into his home, and that was it. That's how it always ends. There's never a climax because I do my job and nothing more. After absent-mindedly mumbling to myself, "I hate the rain," I took off to do my next job, hoping it would be a simpler one, but even if it wasn't, I'd do the job. I always do the job. So, if that darkness ever consumes you, if those demons inside you win, or hell, if you're an actual demon your damn self, search for me, and you'll find me. I'll help you hide that darkness so it can continue to grow, rain or shine. Preferably shine.
One night, a man had a nightmare. It was the most frightening thing he had ever experienced. In the dream, he found himself walking in a desert. Somehow, he had no idea how he had gotten there, but he knew he was lost and alone. When he looked down, he realized he was carrying a machete in his hand. The long, cold steel blade looked razor sharp. The sun was beating down and the heat was intense. The man was sweating profusely, but kept walking, even though he had no idea where he was going. After some time, he saw a dark figure crouching down in the distance. As he approached, he saw that it was a person, lying in the sand. He had been feeling extremely lonely, so he was grateful to see another human being. He quickly ran up to the man and bent over to help him up. However, when he turned the man over, he took one look at his face and recoiled in horror. He was looking at himself. In that instance, he was so overcome with fear that he raised the machete above his head, and without thinking, hacked the man to death. Horrified by what he had just done, he dropped the weapon and started running through the desert, trying to get away as far away from the place as possible. With every step, his feet sank further into the sand, but he kept going, driven by terror and panic. Eventually, he stumbled and fell to the ground. Lying in the sand, he realized that he had sprained his ankle. He couldn't walk another step. There was nothing he could do except lie there where he had fallen. After a while, he looked up and saw something in the distance. It was the figure of a man, approaching across the wide expanse of desert. As the man approached, he waited until he could see his face clearly. To his horror, he realized it was himself, and in his hand, he was carrying a razor-sharp machete.
I used to work as a housekeeper for this company that would assign me to different houses in the area that they were hiring. I had this one job at a house that was just a few towns over one night. I was reluctant to go since it was late, but I knew an old back road that would cut the driving time in half. It used to be an old logging road, and there's tons of them here in Oregon that can be handy shortcuts to places. One downside was the road was small, windy, and if you got into a crash, you'd basically be in the middle of nowhere surrounded by a forest. So, I'm not sure if it was completely legal to drive on either. So anyways, I was driving down this road, groggy and tired, when I felt a small collision on my trunk. I cursed and pulled over to inspect the damage and talk to the driver, who had seemingly come out of nowhere. He pulled up behind me. I got out and walked over to him and asked if he was okay. I was about 3 feet from the car, and I could see him sitting in there, but he wasn't getting out. It was winter and night, so everything was pitch black and I could barely see anything. But I knew there was a figure there. It was freezing cold and I was getting creeped out, so I told him since there was barely any damage, that I was just gonna go. As I was heading back to my car, I heard his door open behind me. I turned around and saw him, standing there. He was tall and had on a large black coat and baggy jeans. I stepped towards him and noticed something that made my heart sink. His hands were white-skinned, but his face looked dark. I squinted and realized he was wearing black makeup on his face. This scared me even more. I was thinking he was wearing a black face, and for the record, I'm black, and he had followed me out here in the middle of nowhere to harm me. I turned and started for my car when I felt the cold tip of a gun press the back of my head. I was ready to cry at this point, thinking I was gonna die alone out here because of my skin color, and I ended up trying to reason with him. But I could barely choke out my words as I told him he didn't have to do this. And something surprising happened. The guy started to cry as well, and just then he jumped in his car and sped off. Maybe I should have tried to see the license plate, but at that moment, I just got in my car, drove home, and called my parents. I'd never, ever in my entire life thought that I'd narrowly escape from being the victim of what was possibly a hate crime. I'm glad this guy had a change of heart, or whatever you want to call his reasoning for sparing me.
This is The Job by P.A. Nightmares. They say that curiosity killed the cat. Ever wonder why that became a thing? Well, sometimes it's better to let sleeping dogs lie. If I had done that, I would not be in the situation I currently find myself in. There was a legend in the small town that I currently find myself in. I heard a legend of a well in the back of a massive mansion that was said to host all sorts of treasures. This was one such legend. The rumor was that the people that owned the property were rich, and I don't mean they lived in a nice house and had a fancy car rich. I mean the kind of rich where they were descendant from old money. The family did not trust banks, or so the tale said. To protect the wealth of their family, the well in the back of the yard was said to host all sorts of gems, jewels, and money. I plan to confirm these rumors. Oh, I almost forgot to introduce myself. My name's Alex, a thief by trade, but I like to consider myself a liberator of expensive items. After the liberation, I like to give them to people that need them considerably more. Also, please keep the Robin Hood jokes to yourself. I get enough of that shit. Unlike most thieves, I always do my research into a place before breaking into it. I scout my target to see what kind of home defenses they may have, dog, security camera, alarms, and the worst of all, any nosy neighbor. That, if they saw me, could throw a monkey wrench into this whole plan of mine. So, with this all in mind, allow me to take you to the week before the heist. I woke up and put on my electrician's uniform. I use this disguise often, and it allows me to get close to any house to gauge the level of difficulty for my mark. Getting into my SUV, I drove to the location. It was roughly around 3 hours from my hotel. The town by the mansion, but this family owned everything in this town and had themselves far removed from it, isolated in their own estate, never really stepping foot in the town. Parking my vehicle, I noticed that they had a massive gate with an intercom that has clearly been out of order for years, and no one has bothered to repair it either. The gate stood there, rusted, and the doors wide open. This family either does not give a shit about security, or this is going to be a bust. Driving up the path that led to the driveway and parking, I saw no evidence of either a dog or a security system. However, I did notice a security camera, only one, facing the path that overlooked the driveway to the house and to the front door. Getting out of my car and putting on my ball cap, making sure to keep my head down so the cameras did not capture my face, I knocked on the front door. I heard no dog. Excellent, I think to myself. This will make getting in and out without detection much easier. Few things are as annoying or a pain in the ass as a dog. Moments after I knocked on the front door, an elderly man in a suit answered the door. "May I help you, sir?" the old man politely asks. "Yes, sir. I work for the electric company and need to check your meters." "Are you the homeowner, sir?" I said with a polite voice. "No, I am the butler, sir. Would you like me to get Mr. Campbell for you?" "Yes, please. I would appreciate that very much. Thank you, sir." After I had said this, he allowed me into the house. The inside was well furnished, with many fancy objects just waiting to be liberated. But what I came here for, they would not be showing off in the foyer. They kept that in a much more secret location. "Master Campbell, may I present to you, sir? I don't believe I got your name." "Oh, my name is Edward." The butler corrects himself. "May I present to you, Sir Edward?" Yes, that's all well and good, thank you." He waved a hand. "You may be excused. Please, go back to your duties." "Yes, master." And he was gone just as fast as he had come. He looked back at me, eyeing me suspiciously. "What can I do for you?" he asked, clearly in no mood to deal with someone he considered inferior to himself. So I spoke quickly and confidently. "Sir, I am here to check your meters. I am required by my company to inform you I am on your property. I will be in and out. You will not even notice me." He considered me briefly. "Very well. Get to your task and complete it. Show yourself out. I am far too busy to waste my time on the likes of you." Leaving the house, I went around the property and acted as if I were checking the meters while I was examining the perimeter of the property. I did not notice any other cameras or any other security, really. I, however, did notice the well. It sat in the center of the yard. It was locked. Gonna need some tools to get into that. Finishing up, I got back into my car and drove back to the hotel. For the next 3 days, I made sure I had a plan made and had all the tools I would need. I made a few more passes by the house to learn the time of night They went to bed. Any neighbors I would need to be wary about? There were none. The family in the mansion went to bed early, so this seemed like an easy in and out. Finally, the night of the job came. I got into my car and drove the 3 hours it would take to get there. After the long car ride, I got out of my car after parking it a few blocks from the estate to avoid being spotted. Walking the rest of the way, I scaled the massive gate. I had done this hundreds of times before, and this was no different. Getting over the fence, I made a beeline right for the well. After getting out of view of the house, I turned on my flashlight. Right as I got within spitting distance of the well, my world went black. Waking up inside a small wooden box, my arms and legs bound. I could not understand what was happening until I saw 6 figures all standing around the hole that they had placed me in. "Let me go, you bastards!" I yell at them as one of the figures emerges, looking down at the hole. The figure takes off his mask. It's the owner of the house. "What? Why am I in this hole? And tied up? I'm sorry for trespassing, but this does not give you the right to do this. Let me go and I won't tell anyone," I shouted up from the hole. The group just laughed in unison. It was an odd laugh, sending chills down my spine. They stopped just before the leader, the owner, spoke up. "Oh, you think I tied you up and dug a grave just because you were trying to steal from me?" A smile appeared on his face. "Tell the others I said hello." Again, the group laughed as one. He put his mask back on. As 2 others pushed over a rope ladder into my grave, they descended in, not really looking at me. To my horror, they placed a lid over my wooden box. The sound of hammer hitting nails filled my tiny coffin. I screamed, "Let me go!" It was silent for a moment before I heard the dirt hitting the wood. I started to scream and thrash the best I could, trying to loosen up my restraints. Soon, I could no longer hear the dirt hitting the box. The lack of sound made a cold sweat cover my body. I redoubled my efforts, thrashing and smacking my head against the wooden coffin. None of this made any difference. I was tied too tightly to even get free, and then there were 6 feet of dirt above me, with my coffin around me. Once I calmed down, I could swear I heard voices. They were coming from my left and right, screaming as well. They were the others trapped in the earth with me, probably in their own coffins. "Hello! Is there somebody there?" I tried to yell, but I had used up so much of my precious oxygen, it came out as a meek, graspy whisper. Shortly after, I would lose consciousness, and this time, I was not sure I would ever wake up again. The following night, around 3 a.m., the 6 hooded figures each dug up a grave and took the bodies from their respective resting places. They headed to the well that hid no treasure. It was a massive altar. Each sacrifice had their blood removed and their heart set on 6 different pedestals that held horrific depictions of creatures. "We offer these 6 sacrifices. We offer you their lifeblood and their hearts, in hopes that we please you, old gods. May you bless and show us your favor," said the leader. His head bowed. He turned to the others. "Now, get this meat gutted and cleaned. We have our meal with our gods."
I moved a lot when I was growing up. By the time freshman year of high school came around, I had moved 7 or so times, and I was about a year and a half into my most recent move. I had found a pretty close group of friends in middle school, and we all went to high school together. I met him through one of those close friends. They were in a band together, and even though he was almost 4 years older than us, we welcomed him into our group. Sam was easily twice my size, tall and heavy-set, and originally kind of intimidating, although I was never afraid of large men before him. Lesson learned. I had kind of a bad home life, and I spent as much time as I could at school, sometimes hanging around the school campus until 6 or 7 at night with this group of friends. 3 of us lived in the same direction, and we would walk home together. One slightly colder evening, Sam offered to walk me home since the others had gone home already. I just thought that he was being a gentleman. He then mentioned something from when he lived in California. He didn't walk a friend home one night, and something horrible happened. He left it at that, and I let him walk me home.
We got a lot closer after that, and we bonded over both living in California, and we exchanged numbers. He would message me late into the night about his depression and self-harm, and I just wanted to help. A few months later, he tried asking me out. It was this big romantic gesture. He learned a Disney song on the ukulele and sang it to me in the cafeteria, but I was already dating someone, so when I turned him down, he became angry. I started seeing him everywhere. We were still friends, and we still hung out in the same group, but I would often pass him on the street walking somewhere, and a few minutes later, I would see him change directions, and he then would follow me. He would walk me to my classes by following me in the passing period at a distance. I started minimizing the group time that I spent together with him, and he would just follow me more. I had friends meet me at each class and walk me to my next one because I felt unsafe and he knew where I lived. He then started talking, not to me, but to my mutual friends about the one girl in California who we tried walking home. At first, she just shared my name and some other coincidences. She then started having the same brown curly hair and blue eyes, and every time that he told the story about her, she became more and more like me. He then said what happened. Over several weeks, the fantasy evolved. They were walking home one night and were jumped by someone with a knife. It was a robbery gone wrong on her birthday, January 24th, which is also my birthday. She then died horribly, and he couldn't react in time. She then bled out in his arms. Sarah, who has brown curly hair, blue eyes, my name, my birthday, and sounds just like me, bled out in his arms. Each retelling adding more and more detail, and this guy with his sick fantasy about my ending would follow me around and knew where I lived. My boyfriend was abusive mentally and physically, but I stayed as close to him as I could because if anything were to happen, I knew that he would throw a punch. I never felt safe at school or in our little town walking home from school at night. One day at school, Sam had a breakdown. He freaked out and ran out of the school in a panic. I was sent after him, and I found him curled up on the floor. I got closer to him. I knew about his anxiety and depression, and my safety set aside, I wanted to make sure that he was okay. It was then that he told me this horrifying story that I was hearing from my mutual friends with even more detail. We had been walking home from a concert in California. We had passed a dark alley and a homeless man came out with a rusty knife and asked for anything valuable. I fumbled for my phone. I didn't have anything else on me, and the homeless man thought that I was calling the police. He stabbed me once, twice, again and again, and Sam just stood there horrified. He saw red, grabbed a broken glass bottle near my body, and attacked the homeless man. He said that he ended him with his own knife, and he also told me that he ended somebody else. My real-life stalker told me that he ended somebody. It didn't matter how messed up he was anymore. I didn't care if it was fantasy or real, and I didn't care if it would affect his mental health. I needed to go to the police. I was starting to become scared for my own life. My friends convinced me to go to the school counselor first. That morning, we went and told them everything, the stalking, the stories, and how he admitted to ending someone, and that was the real reason they left California. I was afraid for my life and I wanted to call the police. The counselor didn't take us seriously. She went to the principal, and the principal, who was not a mental health expert, called Sam in and talked about the accusations. The principal then informed me that he did not think that Sam had any kind of mental illness or that I was in any real danger. I lost faith in adults that day. I gave up on going to the police. I stayed with my friends and they walked me between classes. I was also hiding behind my abusive boyfriend, and I would often look behind me if I was walking home that year. The counselors ended up gaslighting us to the point where we started feeling that this was a fever dream, and I would start to think that it was made up if it weren't for my journal entries recording the events and my growing panic and all of the stories from my friends. Hey Sam, let's not meet again. Edit. I don't think anyone actually was ended in California. I think that he's a pathological liar and that he was so deep in fantasy that he convinced himself that this was real. No, I wasn't physically hurt, but the emotional scarring and threats that he posed me was 100% real.
She's a keeper. By the odd cat lady. That's what my dad always used to say, with a chuckle and pat my head. She's a keeper, he'd say to a grocer, or a clerk at a convenience store. People used to fawn over the cute pigtailed gal by her daddy's side. Always said her pleases and thank yous, never threw a tantrum, was an absolute angel. Maybe this is why when I grew up I always needed someone giving me a pat on the back. If I'm not getting a compliment on how I look or how well I did at work, I'm going to assume I did something wrong or I had a piece of lettuce stuck in my teeth all day. This hasn't always worked out for me. I'm a keeper, but I can also be a sucker. Like what's been happening with my boss. I love working as a secretary. It's a job that makes me feel really fulfilled. This makes me a bit of a stereotype, though, with how I practically melted when Jonathan Bryce, my boss, complimented my blouse and my work ethic on my first day. I just reminded myself by looking at the silver ring on his left hand and the picture on his desk with his children that I shouldn't read too much into it. Jonathan was perfect, though, and over time I realized I read him just right. I never wanted to be the other woman. I just wanted to be loved. And being around Jonathan, working late nights just to have a moment to talk to him, having drinks after work. The inevitable happened. He kissed me after a few too many beers, and we ended up going back to my place. We slept together. I poured my heart out to him after that, how I had liked him for so long that I really felt a connection with him. He just smiled and brushed the hair from my eyes, telling me that I was the kind of girl you didn't just let get away. Of course I believed him. Of course I swallowed the lump in my throat whenever I saw Mariana come in to visit her husband, my lover. Of course I ignored how I was the choice topic of gossip in the office. How the guys smirked and the other woman gave me the side eye and the cold shoulder. Of course I listened when Jonathan said he was going to leave her soon. He just needed to make sure he didn't hurt her. And of course, whenever he called me to meet him at our typical meeting spot, a hotel downtown, I was there with bells on. Yeah, I know what you're thinking of me. I think it too. I'm not the brightest bulb in the package, but like I told you, I'm pretty easy to manipulate. But I love Jonathan. I love his work ethic. I love how he takes care of his kids. Kids that he learned soon enough I couldn't have. I wonder if that was part of my appeal to him. That he couldn't accidentally knock me up. He didn't love me. I was just an easy lay. A stereotype in every sense of the word. I only started wising up last week when it occurred to me that Jonathan really wasn't slowing down on his relationship with his wife, and certainly wasn't preparing for divorce proceedings. She was pregnant with their third child. I saw the pictures he posted on Facebook on their anniversary dinner. It hit me like a semi-truck when I read his status about enjoying their 15 years together and couldn't wait to see what the next 15 will bring. I cried. I drank a lot of wine, and then I asked him to come over to my apartment. That we needed to talk. Scary words for a guy, right? Took Jonathan a while to drag his ass over, which by then I was even more drunk. I don't drink often, and certainly not in excess. But can you blame me? I had just had that reality-shattering realization that I was just a pet to call on whenever he wanted to F and spew nonsense words at. Nonsense words I fell for. Well, I did what I should have done 6 months ago. I called him out on his bullshit, said that he was never going to leave his wife, but he wasn't going to stop keeping me as his side piece. He tried to calm me down. But I wasn't going to back down to his pretty words this time. Either pick me or stay with your wife, else I'll call her and let her know the truth. My ultimatum I'd spent the previous hour preparing. I felt super proud of it when I spat it out, expecting him to pick at least one of the options so this nonsense could end. Jonathan's face went white, then red, and then he picked a third option. He killed me. Jonathan picked up the empty wine bottle while he muttered something about me being too much trouble. Then he brought it down right on the top of my head, caving my skull in on the first smash, sending shards of glass all over my living room. I dropped like a rock, but I guess Jonathan wasn't just too pissed off because he used the remains of the bottle in his hand to keep stabbing me again and again in the throat and the neck. I was about decapitated by the time he came to his senses. Of course, Jonathan freaked out, panicked, just washed the blood off his hands and wiped down the bottle before escaping the apartment. Left me there, all alone, head nearly off my shoulders. My living room a mess of blood, wine, and glass. Man, you should have seen the look on his face when I came into work today. I was at my desk by the time he came in. He looked like hell. Understandably. He just killed a woman 2 days before. But he froze in his steps when he saw me sitting at my desk, tip-tapping away on my keyboard while scheduling another appointment for later that week. I just waved to him real quick before going back to work. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Jonathan bolt for his office and slam the door. Oh, that felt so good, watching him be the one to run in fear. Was he doubting his memory? Was he trying to convince himself that he had just had a really bad dream? I clocked out after that, complaining about a cold. It'd be passed around the office if I stayed, but I didn't go home. I went to Jonathan's home, a nice house in a nice part of town. I saw his wife working in the small garden out front, and after adjusting my scarf, I got out and walked up the drive. She didn't see me until I was right behind her. Mariana was a pretty woman, even right now with a smudge of dirt across her face, no makeup, and her auburn hair held back with a yellow bandana. I cleared my throat and she nearly dropped the flower bulb she had in her hands. She glanced up, immediately recognizing me. "Oh, hi, Nicole. Is something wrong?" She got up, brushing off her hands and smiling from ear to ear. Her pregnancy was just starting to show, her belly just so slightly growing. "Can we talk inside?" "Oh, sure, sweetheart. The kids are at school, won't be back for a few more hours. Are you all right? Your voice sounds a bit raspy." "I'll be fine." I waited until she was sitting down before I began the most difficult conversation of my life. And I got the most difficult part out of the way first. "Your husband and I have been having an affair for almost a year." It was so sad to see how Marianne just sighed, how she just nodded. I figured with all the late nights at work and business trips that didn't take him out of town, I was just about to hire a private investigator to start checking in on him. "You saved me a chunk of change. Are you still sleeping with him?" I shook my head. "No, I figured that ended when he about took my head off with a wine bottle," I said. Her brows knit in concern, so I decided to show her. I undid the scarf around my neck and showed her what I'd been hiding all morning at work. My neck is a sight right now. all purple and black and covered in decaying, cut-up flesh. I can't even imagine how the smell must be to someone not used to it. The putrefaction had spread down to my chest, which I showed her by unbuttoning my blouse. I had to start tearing my skin off to get any sort of relief. You can't imagine how horrid the itching gets when your flesh starts rotting off your bone with your skin holding it all in. I even removed my gloves to show off the pus-filled sores and bubbles forming in my wrists and fingers. Marianne went white as a sheet as she took it all in. It looked so wrong. My face perfect as it always had been, but from the neck down I looked like rotting roadkill. When the wave of stench finally hit her, she bolted for the bathroom. I could hear her violently throwing up from where I sat. I just about buttoned my shirt back up when she came back, teetering a bit, and still looking pale, but managing to remain steady. Wait, show me again. I shrugged and unbuttoned my shirt again. If she wanted a reason to barf again, she was welcome to it. But she didn't. She sat beside me, her expression of disgust melting away into one of wonder. Before Jonathan insisted I take care of the kids full time, I used to be a surgeon. You shouldn't be alive. You can't be alive. Are you a ghost? No, I shook my head. This just happens sometimes. I'm surprised it happened after your husband killed me. I thought I was a goner, but then I woke up with my body falling apart. Maybe I was due for a shedding. Maybe this is just happens when I get hurt real bad. I don't know. Jonathan. She shuddered and shook her head. He's a bastard, but he wouldn't. He beat me with a wine bottle, Mariana. I pulled the bloody shards out of my purse, and then when it broke, he stabbed me in the neck. All because I told him the affair was over. Now she was crying, tears rolling down her cheeks as her bottom lip wobbled with her sobs. No, oh my God, I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I need your help. I rebuttoned up my blouse, but I left the scarf on my lap. It'll take me a few weeks to really come back together. But my daddy told me of a way to help me heal faster. His sister was like me, fell apart, rotted like a corpse, and then looked just as pretty as ever in a few days. It took longer, though, much longer, before she started working as a mortician. It didn't take any effort at all to convince her to help me. The kids are having a sleepover at Grandma's tonight. They really are cuties. There's a wine glass laced with sleeping medication ready for Jonathan when he gets home, and I'm waiting in the basement, passing the time by ripping off more rotten skin, wondering what human flesh will taste like. Mariana's already said I can stay here while I recover. She wants to study me. I'm something she's never seen before, and she's fascinated. She says I'm a keeper. So quoth this raven.
The streets glistened silently outside my window. I was glad the rain had stopped. The gloomy skies did nothing to alleviate the sick grasp of anxiety in my stomach. I traced the remnants of drops on the sill, straining to hear the crunch of the wheels on the gravel, which would tell me my husband was finally home. But it was not yet 7. The harsh words from yesterday's phone call still grated in my ears.
I'm telling you, my flight is delayed. Jesus, woman, I don't even feel like coming home.
I had felt a chill run down my spine as he voiced my worst fears. And even as I had looked up his flight status online and saw it landed an hour ago, I had known it was only a matter of time. I'm not a paranoid wife. I wouldn't have logged into his mail and noted down his itinerary in detail if it had been a passing fling. I love my husband more than anything in the world. and I was willing to swallow a few late nights and the new smell of vanilla on his shirts. But the nights stretched into days and weeks and work trips that had never been there before. At first, I was really quite nice about it. I cooked his favorite meals, organized outings, and paraded around in lingerie that he used to go crazy over, even months ago. But then he slipped further and further away, and I spent every night biting my fist, trying to not let my sobs tear me apart as I lay alone in our big, beautiful bed. But I love my husband more than anything in the world, and he belongs with me. I would not allow it to be otherwise. When we had first met in college, he had been with another girl, an ordinary bird brain who hadn't deserved him. It wasn't very long before I took care of that. When he told his mother he wanted to marry me, she opposed it vehemently. On the day of our wedding, I shed tears and assured him that spiteful bitch was smiling down at us from heaven. It was time for me to take my husband back again. A bang startled me from my fretful reverie. I bit my lip as the key turned in the lock, and he entered the house, looking like he'd returned from a party instead of a weary 10 hours at the airport. I greeted him with my usual bright smile and did my best not to flinch as the smell of vanilla hit my nostrils when he walked past me to the bedroom. I thought I would finish washing up in the kitchen. That would distract me. He walked in there 5 minutes later while I was wiping my big knife, like I knew he would. He had noticed the silence in the house.
Where's Leo?
Our golden retriever. My husband's wedding gift from his father. Leo and I tolerated each other for his sake, but I hated how much he loved that dog. I was never any good at sharing.
How was your flight?
He looked annoyed, like I knew he would. My husband is predictable, as people are to one another when they've been married for 10 years. But I loved how well I knew him and could sift through the humming thoughts in his brain.
Good. I asked you where Leo was.
That's all he could think about after being away for 10 days. I was glad he was gone, so my husband could finally focus on me. On us. He's gone, and you need to stop seeing her, or she'll follow. I could almost hear his heart turn over in that well-muscled chest of his.
What did you do?
I smiled. The knife in my hand shined when the light fell in it. It pleased me so much. I pride myself on a clean kitchen. There's a fresh patch of earth in the garden. Please remember not to trample on the new grass. The handle on the knife wasn't clean enough. I knew that would worry at me, so I started working on that next. My husband stared at me like he was seeing a new woman, but he wasn't. Of course he knew deep down I love him more than anything in the world, and I would do anything for us.
What do you want me to do?
He whispered. I noticed his white knuckles gripping the edge of the table, and I went over and placed my hand over them. I tried not to feel hurt when he recoiled from my touch. I know it was difficult for him, but I also know he now understands how important our marriage is to me. He's not going to leave me again. So I told him what to do, and giggled as he called her up and told her he never loved her. Her cries were music to my ears, and I almost forgot my lonely vigil these last few months. Almost. Do you love me?
Yes.
But I didn't like how he said that, like the word tore out of him. So I made him call everyone who knew about his floozy and tell them how he realized that there was never anyone else for them but me, and nothing would break us apart. Then I poured him his favorite whiskey, and as he grew incoherent with grief for that wretched dog, I drew him to me and smiled as the familiar desire shut everything else out for the both of us. We were sitting across each other at the dining table when the doorbell rang. I got up and opened the door before the scratching and yapping got worse.
So, how was the movie?
I stepped aside as Leo yanked his leash free from our neighbor's grasp and launched himself at my husband. Loved the ending. Thanks for looking after him.
I have to find out, Marie. Have to end it. Can't go on like this. I still love you. Even if you don't love me back. Look after Lucy. If you wake up at 3:33 a.m., don't look outside. That was my husband's note said. The note he left before he vanished. Just walking out of the house in the middle of the night and never came back. Front door wide open, his car still parked on the driveway, his clothes still hanging up in the cupboard. He even left his toothbrush. I suppose I should start at the beginning. It's just hard to know exactly when that was. Liam and I had been married for almost 8 years, but have been having problems for more than half of that. After our daughter was born, our sex life fizzled out, and I suppose things spiraled from there. We could never quite get on the same page, and every small thing would inevitably lead to a massive argument. When old frustrations didn't get a chance to evaporate, they just slimmed beneath the surface, and I think we were both guilty of spilling over the edges at the slightest increase of heat. Eventually, we simply found it easiest to stay out of each other's way. We each had dominion over different chores. He cooked, I cleaned, and generally, the only time spent together was sleeping. One particular morning, as I stirred from my dreams, I was surprised to find him sat up in bed, propped against the backrest and staring forward into space. Normally, once Liam was awake, he was up and about. Maybe it was because of his work or his outdoor hobbies, but he's always been a morning person. I noticed I was awake and snapped him out of whatever thoughts he had been ensnared in. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just tired," he said, stretching like a bear out of hibernation, as if to exaggerate the point. He clambered out of bed and paused, as if hesitating whether to tell me something. As he dressed, his voice took on an air of forced casualness. Woke up in the middle of the night and checked the clock. Tossed and turned for what felt like hours, and when I looked back at the clock, it was still the same time. Must have misread the clock the first time, I yawned, rolling over and closing my eyes. I could hear him muttering to himself as he put his socks on. Something about never believing him about anything. If my eyes were open, I would have rolled them. The rest of that day was normal enough. He took Lucy to school and went to work, and I probably would have forgotten all about it. But after we had gotten to bed, I awoke to a thud in the dead of night. Barely visible in the starlight drifting around the curtains, Liam stood at the foot of the bed, and I sat up, rubbing my eyes. "What are you doing?" "Stupid phone doesn't work," he snapped. "Not so loud. You'll wake up Lucy," I hissed. "First the clock freezes. Now my phone won't turn on," he moaned. My eyes drifted to the floor when a dim rectangle of light was reflecting off the carpet. "Well, it's on now." Liam stopped pacing and turned around. As he scooped up the phone, its bright screen illuminated his face, wrinkled up in confusion. Must have knocked some sense into it. Using this phone screen as a light source, he walked out of the door towards the bathroom. "Clock definitely needs new batteries, though," he added in a whisper. Stretching over to his side of the bed, I reached over his pillow to the bedside table and lifted his alarm clock to face me. Its blacked face shone large crimson numbers on a digital display. 3:34 a.m. As I squinted at it through the darkness, it flickered to 3:35 a.m. Seemed to be working fine to me. I rolled over to my side of the bed and went back to sleep. It was my turn to take Lucy to school that day, and as I got her dressed, Liam made breakfast. Turns out he actually had woken her up when he had thrown his phone, but he must have felt guilty since he was making pancakes. They've always been Lucy's favorite, probably from one movie or another, and despite Liam's insistence that we're not Americans, we don't make pancakes for bloody breakfast, he knew they were an easy way to make her happy. That was one thing I can't fault my husband for. He did love our daughter. It wasn't often he went out of his way to make her happy, but I suppose he tried when it mattered. But the next morning, he was in a foul mood. "Oh, now she's awake," he grunted sarcastically when I walked into the kitchen, fastening up my dressing gown. I ignored the comment. It wasn't like I had slept in overly long. Besides, it was the weekend. I braced myself for a tense breakfast, sat in frosty silence. But as I approached the worktop, my eyes fell on a blackened screen covered in splintered hairline cracks. "What happened to your phone?" "Stopped working again," he said, ruffling his newspaper. "Tried knocking some sense into it, like I did the other night, but it didn't work. Then I tried again, a bit harder. Too hard, apparently." "Well, that was stupid," I said, matter-of-factly, as I put the kettle on. Liam didn't say anything, but he folded up his newspaper, threw the last dregs of coffee down his throat, and left the room, probably more mad at himself than me. If he had been mad at me, he would have shot some comment back. He always did like to have the last word. His voice took on a sugary lilt as he bumped into Lucy in the hall. "Morning, darling. Didn't wake you up again last night, did I?" "No, Daddy." I suppose I did find it a little strange that my husband had managed to smash his phone without waking either of us up, but those thoughts were droned out by the sheer idiocy of it. With both of us in a mood already, we avoided each other as best as we could. This was always a little bit harder on weekends, and just before we slept, we ended up bickering. "What's that?" I asked, as I saw him place something under his pillow. "A torch." I couldn't help but laugh. "What do you need a torch for?" "To see where I'm bloody going if I wake up in the night again." "Well, maybe if you kept your anger in check, you'd still have your phone. Maybe if you stopped criticizing me all the time, I wouldn't be so quick to anger." And as simple as that, we descended into an argument that got increasingly personal and ended up with us both rolling over in bed, backs facing each other. When you're mad at someone, even the slightest thing can annoy you. The way they huff out of breath through their nose, or the way they tug at the sheets. Eventually, Liam started snoring. I wasn't far behind. I woke up the next day to an empty bed. I assumed my husband would still be in a mood with me, but when I found him that morning, he was completely oblivious. Staring up at the clock above the fireplace, he clutched a collection of watches and alarm clocks in his arms. In the background, the news was on, but he had got it on mute. "Hey," he said, as soon as I walked in the room. He actually seemed pleased to see me. "Could I look at your phone a sec?" What are you doing?" "Just, what time is it?" I told him, and when he shook his head in exasperation, I showed him. "They can't all be wrong," he muttered, setting the bundle in his hands on top of the fireplace, one by one. He left the alarm clock until last. He grabbed it with both hands, raising it into the air to examine. "What are you doing, Liam?" I asked sleepily, making a point of taking my pink watch from his collection. "There was a power cut last night, or something. I think there's been one every night. Even my torch didn't work." I shrugged. "The clocks have batteries. A power cut wouldn't stop them." "You're not listening," he said, shaking his head. "Even my torch didn't work. Nothing worked. That's why my phone wasn't turning on. I tried yours last night, and it wouldn't turn on either." "You were going through my phone last night?" "No," he said. "I was seeing if it worked, and it didn't. Nothing did. Not the lights, not the fridge, not the watches. The only thing in the whole house that was still on was this clock." He raised a little alarm clock in his hands, and it was stuck on that same time, 3:33 a.m. "Are you sure this wasn't a dream?" "It wasn't a bloody dream." "Okay, so there's a power cut last night," I said, making my way towards the door. "Do you want a cup of tea?" "It wasn't just," he started, rubbing his brow in genuine exasperation. "Look, I was up for a while. At least an hour. It had to be. All this while, nothing worked. All the while, this clock said 3:33 a.m. Then suddenly, everything turned back on, back to normal, and this clock said 3:34 a.m. "So, what are you saying?" He gestured wildly to the television, pointing to the little timer at the bottom of the screen and holding the alarm clock to compare. They both matched to the minute. How could it be the same? Where was that time gone? His movements were so frantic, he looked like he was 2 steps away from frothing at his mouth. "It must have been a dream, Liam. I don't know, call the electric board or something. See if they had any power cuts. I'm making a cup of tea. It wasn't a frickin' dream, I heard him mutter as he knelt in front of the TV, holding the alarm clock up to the screen and comparing times. I suppose that was the start of his obsession, but at least he was bearable that day. I could tell it was occupying his mind, but he didn't mention it again, until he woke me up, at least. I think it was the thud that woke me up more than the whimper, but the whimpering was what made me sit bolt upright. What the... Liam's voice drifted over the foot of the bed, and I could barely see the shape of him scrambling backwards on the floor. The curtains warped open, moonlight shining through. He must have fallen over, but he was kicking himself away from the window, wide eyes glinting as he shook his head in denial. As I got out of bed and made my way over to him, he flinched and looked up at me. Even in the dim light, I could make out the terror etched in his face. I'd never seen my husband scared like this. "There's someone outside," he spluttered in a frantic whisper. "Someone in a mask, or they saw me. They looked right at me." I rose and peeked out of the curtains myself. Our quiet street looked normal to me. Parked cars, street lights, and houses opposite. I scanned around, looking for people, but came up short. "There's nobody out there," I said, letting the curtain fall back. Liam clambered to his feet and shoved the curtain aside, getting his whole body in front of the window. He searched the empty street with both hands pressed against the glass. "I saw someone," he muttered. "I bloody saw someone." As I got back in bed, I glanced at the alarm clock on Liam's side of the bed. 3:35 a.m. The next day was my turn to take Lucy for school, and I didn't see much of Liam all day, despite not going out of my way to avoid him. In the evening, I caught him fiddling extra locks on the doors, a deadbolt on front and back. I had to bite my tongue not to say anything, but knew it would just cause a fight. Besides, we lived in an okay neighborhood, but maybe a little bit of extra caution wouldn't go amiss. What if Liam had seen someone out there, looking to rob us, or hurt us? I stirred that night to find the bed empty. A quick glance around the room told me Liam was elsewhere. Since I was already awake, I decided to go to the bathroom, and on the landing I bumped into my husband, walking up the stairs. Even in the dim light, I could see him trying to hide something behind his back. "What's that?" I asked before he could open his mouth. "Nothing," he muttered. I walked down the steps to see what he was hiding, but he twisted and grabbed my arm with his free hand. "Go to bed," he hissed. "What have you got? Is that a crowbar?" "It's nothing," he said. He dropped any pretense of hiding it now. I had guessed correctly. The tool fell to his side, glinting in the darkness. "Go to bed." "Frickin' psycho," I spat in disbelief, stepping away from him. "Well, it's a good job I had it. Someone was trying to open the door. I must have scared them off." "What? Someone was trying to get inside?" "Yeah, I could hear them trying the handle." I had hoped that would be the end of it, but was sorely mistaken. Liam's night obsession only became worse and worse. He was tetchier than ever, snapping at the smallest thing. It was clear he wasn't getting enough sleep, and if it wasn't for me arguing him on, he would have been much later for work, if he ever went at all. Not that I ever got any thanks for it. I became the object of his anger. What was happening was somehow my fault. I didn't believe him. Wouldn't help him. "Wake me up then, if it's so bad," I said one day. "Don't you think I've tried that? I've shooken you, slapped you, but you won't wake up until it's over, until he's gone." "Until who is gone?" I asked, cautiously processing what he was trying to tell me. "He'd slap me?" Subconsciously, I rubbed my cheek. Surely I would have felt my husband if he had been slapping me in my sleep. Surely I would have a mark or even a bruise. Liam wasn't exactly a small man, but it also wasn't like him to hurt me. He could be a prick, sure, but he had never purposefully hurt me before. "Forget it," he muttered. The alarm woke me up, beeping in the darkness. As soon as I rose to turn it off, Liam's hand pressed it down to silence it. He was fully dressed and standing on his side of the bed. He had the crowbar clutched in one hand. "What are you... what time is it?" I asked blearily, still half asleep. "You told me to wake you up. I can't do it once it starts, but maybe it'll work if you're awake before." He stalked towards the window and opened the curtain a crack with the crowbar peeking through. "For God's sakes, Liam." But I got up all the same. If it would keep him quiet and get him back to some normality, I'd tolerate it. It was hard to believe I found myself wanting the old Liam back. This new version was making me see how good we had it before. 3:32 a.m., the clock read. Standing on the other side of the curtain, I pulled it open and peered outside. Nothing except the quiet road, streetlights casting an artificial haze across the asphalt pavement, a distant rumble of a car speeding along a connected road unseen. "So what are we looking for exactly?" I asked. Liam didn't reply, so I kept watching the streets outside. And watching. Shaking my head, I eventually pulled my head away from the curtain and turned to Liam, but he wasn't there. I looked around the room. He wasn't here at all. I never even heard him leave. A quick glance at the clock told me it was 3:38 a.m. Deciding it would be best to look for Liam before returning to bed, I crept out of the room. I eventually found him downstairs on the kitchen floor, hugging his knees and crying. Even despite my current mood for my husband, he looked so weak and fragile, I couldn't help but hug him, the crowbar laid on the tile floor next to him. "I've made it so much worse," he croaked. "He's never got that close before." "What do you mean?" I asked quietly, wiping tears off his cheek. "Why did you leave the room?" "You wouldn't move. You wouldn't answer me. I thought for sure you could see it too, but it was like you were sleeping with your eyes open, standing up. I came down here and saw him right out there." He pointed to the kitchen window. I glanced over but couldn't see anything through the darkness. Liam swallowed and spoke again, hands trembling. "I opened the window to yell at him, to scare him off, but it was like he was sliding towards me, but fast. Being pulled through the gap I was making, pulled inside. He was almost touching the glass by the time I slammed it shut. He was..." Liam broke off and began crying again. "Oh God, I've made it so much worse." As I looked out the kitchen window, I did notice something. It was whisper faint and fading still. I stood and made my way to the window. If it wasn't for our neighbor's security light in the background, I never would have made it out, but sure enough, on the window my husband had said he had opened, there was a faint smear and condensation, the kind a hot breath makes on a cold surface. I wiped it with my fingers, but it didn't come away. It was on the other side of the glass. As I watched it fade away, I tried to reassure myself. It couldn't have been breath marks from a person. It was too tall. They had to have been 7 feet tall or so to make marks like that, but it did unnerve me. Coupled by my husband's reaction, it was hard not to tremble a little myself. I led him back to bed and we tried to sleep. Or one of us did at least. Liam just sat up all night. Just sat there, staring at nothing and shaking. The next day, I called the electronic board to see if they had any reports of power cuts in our area. Not for a couple of months, they said. Then I called the non-emergency number for police to see if they had any break-ins or home invasions around my postcode lately. They were reluctant at first, but eventually told me, "No increased activity in your postcode, ma'am." That didn't leave me with many choices. The simplest explanation is often the correct one, and the simplest explanation was that my husband was losing his frickin' mind. That didn't explain the fog on the window, but maybe that was just damp air, or a trick of the light. Whatever the explanation, my husband's behavior was starting to get out of hand and was scaring Lucy. His eyes were constantly wild and nervous, as though expecting something to lurk out of the shadows at any moment. He bought extra locks for the windows, security cameras, and even metal grills to fix over the downstairs windows. I drew the line at that. I was already close to taking Lucy and walking and told him as much. I hoped that would snap him out of it, but all he said was, "Fine." He left the grills off, but installed the rest. That night, I made him sleep on the sofa downstairs and had restless sleep myself, drifting in and out. After a bit of tossing and turning, I wondered what time it was and reached out for my phone, but the screen wouldn't turn on. Frowning, I pulled myself across the empty bed and picked up Liam's alarm clock. I almost dropped it when I read the time. 3:33 a.m. Scrambling out of bed and putting on my dressing gown, I tried the bedroom light switch, but nothing happened. Same in the hall. Was this Liam's idea of a joke? Was he so desperate for me to share his own delusions that he'd somehow turned everything off? That would be easy enough, I supposed. Flick the fuse board off and drain my battery without me knowing. What stumped me was the bathtubs. When I turned them out of sheer desperation, not even a drop of water dripped out. I suppose Liam could have isolated the water, but I didn't understand why he would. He never mentioned the water not working. Making my way to the stairs, I had to feel my way across the walls. With no lights working and no light source to use, the interior hallway was pitch black, and I awkwardly shuffled my feet down each step, taking my time clutching the banister. Downstairs was no better. Normally, even at this time, there would be enough light coming from the glow of the streetlights outside to see my path, but not even the streetlights were working. Liam couldn't do that. Power cuts have always unsettled me. It feels like being plunged back a step in our evolution. They shake you out of your daily life, and for a moment you're an animal again. Afraid. Powerless. We forgot how much we rely on electricity, but power cuts always remind us. "Liam," I whispered. Even though I was afraid, I didn't want to wake Lucy. Hopefully she could sleep right through it, at least until morning. I made my way through the kitchen, feeling for cabinets and door handles so I didn't smash into them. "Liam!" Still no reply, but then I was being quiet. Strangely, the fear which most crept in my mind was him attacking me with that stupid crowbar, mistaking me for an intruder. I tried again, raising my voice just beyond a strangled whisper. "Liam!" Nothing. Maybe he was sleeping. It would be ironic if he slept through this power cut, the first one I had been awake for. In the living room, I could just see his silhouette, sat on the sofa facing away from me. My eyes were just beginning to adjust to what little light there was, and as I stepped around the sofa, I could see that he was awake, eyes open, staring forward. He gripped something tight in both hands. A hunting rifle. "Jesus Christ, Liam," I hissed. "What the heck are you doing?" He didn't reply. He just stared forward, his breathing slow. "You know I hate that thing," I muttered, twisted to see what he was looking at. A window facing onto our garden. It was hard to tell, just a little slither of the moonlight to see, but it didn't look like anyone or anything was out there. Turning back to Liam, I took a hold of the gun and tried to pull it out of his grip. He didn't budge, not even the barest hint of emotion passed his face. Him and that stupid gun. He told me he had sold it after his last trip. I tried again, really trying now, bracing myself to wrench it as hard as I could. Again, Liam didn't even wobble. He didn't even look like he was tensing. "Well, I believe you now," I said, letting go of the weapon, "but I wish you'd stop acting like this. Just tell me what's wrong." Liam said nothing, did nothing, not even so much as a frown. Even his breathing was the same steady pace. I tried pulling him up, but it was like he was frozen solid. It began to scare me a little. "Liam?" I asked, genuinely worried. Still no reply. As I looked closer, I realized something. Liam wasn't blinking. I took him by the shoulders and tried to shake him, but he didn't even wobble. It was like trying to push a wall. That's when I remembered what he had said the time he had woken me up with the alarm. It was like you were sleeping with your eyes open. His words echoed through my mind, and a thought gripped me. One way to test if he was pretending. I raised a finger to his face and slowly, carefully brought it to his eye. My finger pressed into the white of his eyeball, wet and squishy. Liam didn't even as much as blink. I took an involuntary step back and grabbed my hand over my mouth. Liam's body was here, but he wasn't. Sleeping with his eyes open, comatose. Collapsing on the chair in front of him, my mind raced. Was this what he was going through? Every night? Trapped in this place where nothing worked, alone? He said it felt like hours. Surprisingly, he gave me some comfort. I could just wait. I could just wait until it was over. So that's what I did. I just sat in that chair and tried to go to sleep. But no matter what I tried, I just couldn't seem to drift off. Try as I might, my mind was awake. Eventually, I gave up and just sat there, waiting, shivering in the dark. It did feel like hours had passed and nothing had worked. Occasionally, I'd try again, just in case, whispering to my statue of a husband, with no reply. As I sat in the chair, willing time to creep forwards, waiting for the light to come back to the world, something else tickled the back of my mind. My husband had seen someone outside. Maybe I wasn't alone. The thought sent a chill down my spine, and my eyes darted amongst the black windows around me. Each one could be hiding someone. Whoever was out there had brought my husband the tears. I drew my knees up, clutching them for warmth. It didn't work. Goosebumps prickled my skin, and I wished my husband would say something. Anything. The way he stared at the window behind me with such intensity made me keep checking over my shoulder. Faced with an internal weight just like my husband's vacant body for company, my glances to each window became increasingly desperate. Part of me wanted to see something, just see something and have been done with it. How long did I sit there? 4 hours? 5? I decided to stand, to stretch my legs and warm up if anything. Creeping to the garden window my husband was facing, I gave a long considering search amongst the dark, rustling leaves outside. But I couldn't see anything. Whether it was the paranoia or something else, it felt like someone was watching me through the windows. They made me feel very vulnerable, exposed. I kept to the walls as I stalked around the room, only peeking the bare slither of my face around each window frame. The street outside looked as cold and alone as I felt. My eyes scanned across the cars and houses outside, but without the streetlights working, it was hard to tell for certain. Everything was just black shadows against black night. Even the sky and my neighbors' houses seemed like a blur into one single image. But as I strained my eyes against the dark backdrop, I spotted something that didn't belong. 2 little pinprick lights, faint like distant stars, but on the ground. Squinting, trying to make sense of it, I wondered if it was an animal. The lights were close enough together to be eyes, and the bony, strangly shape above the lights made like antlers. I realized the rest of it was blocked off by a parked car and stood at my tiptoes for a better look. I almost screamed out when I saw the rest of its body. A man's body, standing perfectly in the darkness. As the sound left my throat, whatever it was turned its head, antlers swaying in the night. The pinprick lights of its eyes erupted into twin torrents of light, blinding me. I threw myself out of view, hiding behind the wall, as a beam of pure white light flooded the room, illuminating my husband on the sofa, still clutching his gun, still motionless. That light moved with intent, searching, and I ran. As I made it through the doorway, illumination splashed against the timber frame. My own shadow stretched in front of me. I twisted around the corner, almost slipping into the kitchen tiles. I couldn't grab the gun. My husband's grip was far too strong, but I knew he kept the crowbar upstairs in the wardrobe. As I ran up the stairs, the 2 beams of light followed, passing the hall window, white light passing through the curtain matching my pace, light spilled across its edges as I ran. Even though the curtains were drawn, whatever was watching me knew exactly where I was. Throwing open my bedroom door, I prepared to dive into the wardrobe for some slim chance at defending myself. In the dark room, my eyes snapped to the only light crimson numbers in the darkness. 3:33 a.m. Behind me, light splashed my shadow across the carpeted floor and I fell to meet it, too scared to scream, turning around expecting to see a figure with headlamp eyes and antlers towering over me, but it was just the hall light. Distant gushing water came from the bathroom. The power was back. The water was back. I glanced around the bedroom, back at the alarm clock, tauntingly reading 3:34 a.m. Hard to say how long I laid there, gripping the carpet and sobbing, gut-wrenching wails that hurt my throat. I didn't dare look at the clock. I just laid there, basking in the night. Knowing that means I was away from that place. Lucy found me and maternal instinct swallowed my fears. I forced myself off the floor and scooped her up, wiping away tears. I took her back to bed, wrapping a blanket around myself and fell asleep in a chair. I believe you, I told Liam the next day, still in wide-eyed state of shock. I was there, 3:33 a.m. Everything was turned off, even you. The last part made me cry again. Liam just held me as I trembled. I didn't mention the deer-headed man or his headlamp eyes. I didn't need to. Liam had seen him too. We both called in sick, and this time I said nothing when Liam fit the window grills. I even let him bring the hunting rifle into the bedroom. He propped it up against the wall, and we both laid awake all night, staring at the ceiling, waiting. At 3:30 a.m., Liam sat on the edge of the bed and started to dress. When I asked him what he was doing, he signed and said, If you get trapped there, that means Lucy might one day too. He snatched up the rifle and laid it across his lap, head bowed. If that happens, I can't protect you. Either of you. I could barely talk around the lump forming in my throat. What are you saying? What are you gonna do? I've sat here, night after night, and he just gets closer. The windows rattle so hard, Marie, it sounds like the whole frame is going to come loose. The doors creak and strain. Last time I heard something climbing down our chimney, trying to get through the walls. I don't think I could wait. It's me he wants. Liam, I've got to do this, Marie. I can't just sit here. I've got to do something. Liam, I saw... He wasn't listening, talking over me, too bullheaded, too stubborn. I've got to... The faint tick of the alarm clock silenced us both. Our heads snapped towards it in unison. 3:33 a.m. As soon as my eyes fell upon the crimson letters, they flickered to 3:34 a.m. And when I turned back, Liam was gone. In his place, a note. I have to find out, Marie. Have to end it. Can't go on like this. I still love you, even if you don't love me back. Look after Lucy. If you wake up at 3:33 a.m., don't look outside. I crumpled the note and ran, searching through the house for him. Liam, I cried. Liam, I saw him too. But my husband was gone. Front door open, cold night air spilled in. Car in the driveway, clothes in the wardrobe. The only thing he took was his gun. The next day was a sleep-deprived blur of police calls, family calls, and tears. And all the while I watched the clocks tick closer, second by second, creeping towards that time I was now more afraid of than anything. Well, almost anything. Liam was right. I had to protect Lucy. I could not let her experience that place. I just couldn't. So I tucked her in bed and waited. Out of the sheer exhaustion, I eventually fell asleep. But then I woke, and it was still pitch black. I didn't need to look at the clock with its crimson numbers to know what time it was. Outside, the wind howled. A garden gate battered open and shut. I wrapped myself tight in my sheet and tried not to think of what Liam had said about rattling windows and something climbing down the chimney. But then, there was a faint glow coming from behind the curtains. The streetlights were still on then. I snatched at my phone, but it wouldn't turn on. The wind swirled and raged, and with a creeping dread, I remembered our streetlights cast as an orange haze, not a pure, perfect white one. I knew in my bones what was casting that light. I didn't know why I looked. Curiosity? Hopelessness? Whatever it was, something drove me to peek behind the curtain. A deer's skull on a rotting body gazed up at me with headlight eyes. As I stared, open-mouthed, it began to drift glacier slow towards me. It didn't walk. It floated, slid. But to be honest, I barely saw it. My eyes had fallen on a second figure, a man of familiar height and build, clutching a hunting rifle. Where his eyes should have been were two black sunken pits with distant pinprick stars. His head tilted, snapped towards me. Those pits swelled into headlamps, high beams of a car, a lighthouse in the night, a spotlight on a stage. My eyes burnt, but I couldn't pull away. Liam raised the rifle, pointed it right at me. Tick. I staggered back. Streetlights flooded the road with an orange haze. The wind died to a murmur. Liam and that thing were gone. The clock read 3:34 a.m. That was last night. The police have a guard posted outside. They think I'm worried about my husband coming back. I suppose in a way I am, but they could post 1,000 guards outside and it wouldn't make a difference. None of them will be awake at 3:33 a.m. It won't stop. Now I've been seeing that thing outside. I know it's going to get worse. Each night, a little closer. Each night, a little stronger. Liam didn't slow it down. He just gave it a way in.
This collab turned out better than I ever imagined. And I want to give a big thank you to everybody who was part of it and everybody who came and watched it. So thank you so much. I hope you all enjoyed.
Until next